Hello guys, I want to talk about Oblivion. Specifically, I want to talk about a minor controversy about the game. Now, this video should not be too controversial, as I'm not addressing the body type controversy. Now I want to talk about a much smaller controversy, one that I think expressing my opinion won't even really offend anyone. Shouldn't offend anyone. Now, this video will be more talking about fantasy in general, not necessarily about Elder Scrolls or Oblivion, but is definitely inspired by the recent remaster of Oblivion. After all, I've not actually even played Oblivion in about 14 years since Skyrim came out. Yes, I did play Oblivion before Skyrim came out, but I've not played it since, and I've not bought the remaster yet. Yet, I do plan on buying it. But as said, this video is not specifically about Elder Scrolls or Oblivion, but is springboarding off of that. Really, I'm wanting to talk about trends in the fantasy genre as a whole. So for context, if you're not familiar with Elder Scrolls or Oblivion or Skyrim, then, well, Oblivion and Skyrim are two games in a series called Elder Scrolls. They're a high fantasy role-playing game, and Oblivion and Skyrim are two of the most popular ones. I think Oblivion came out around 2005, 2006, and then Skyrim came out around 2011. So with Oblivion being about 20 years old, it's pretty dated in its graphics, hence why they remastered it. And there was a specific decision that they made in the remaster, which I think is a very slight effect, and I'm not offended by it, but it's something that some people have talked about. So Oblivion has kind of gotten a little bit of hate over the years for being too bright, too lush, too green, and too European high fantasy or European paradise type atmosphere. Too green, too lush, all that stuff. Compared to Skyrim, which takes place in the northern lands, where it's much more icy, much drier, more tundra, snow. Yes, they've got their green forests here and there, but most of Skyrim is frozen wastelands, frozen tundras, brown grass, stuff like that. So with a lot of people criticizing the lush greenery of Oblivion, the remaster has scaled it down a little bit. Now, I can't really tell a particular big difference, which, again, I've not played it yet, but that is something that some people have talked about. That the Oblivion remaster is really more realistic because it's not so lush, it's not so green. However, some people actually prefer the lush greenery. But this is a small talking point. I'm not seeing any hate or anything between these two factions, but it's something that I want to talk about of the fantasy genre in general. The lush, bright green worlds versus the dark, gritty worlds. It seems the fantasy genre over the last several years, maybe even decades, has really kind of started embracing a lot more of the dark, gritty world and stuff. You know, think of like Dark Souls, Game of Thrones, you know. There's a push for a darker, grittier world. And, you know, even outside fantasy, you know, the horror genre, the thriller genre, even stuff like Batman, Arkham Asylum, dark, gritty. You know, contrasting that with stuff like Oblivion, Lord of the Rings, even Superman. Now, here's the thing about this notion that Oblivion is too bright, too green, and that the remaster is more realistic because they scaled down the greenery and stuff, the brightness. Take a look at this place. This is a lot of greenery. And this is why I wanted to do this video outside rather than in my studio. Right? I mean, look at how beautiful, how green this place is, and how blue the sky is. In fact, it's so blue that you've even got airplanes enjoying the weather. So is Oblivion really unrealistic for being so lush and green and bright and stuff? I mean, that's actually another thing, is brightness. Like, man, the sun's shining on me, and it is bright. You know, sometimes you walk outside and it's like, your eyes are bombarded by the brightness of the light. You know, the world is bright. The world is green. Not all of the world, obviously. There are areas in the world that are lush and green and bright, and there are parts of the world that are snowy and like frozen tundras, and then of course, you know, more sandy areas, deserts, savannas or junior deserts, where you still got brown grass, but doesn't get enough rainfall to actually get good green grass. You know, these are biomes. The Earth is a very diverse place. There's so much variety in the different landscapes that you can get here on Earth, and that's something that I think in this pursuit for gritty, dark worlds, we're starting to lose that appreciation. The world is so much more diverse than dark, gritty Badlands. The world has a lot of different biomes, that lush greenlands that are really the thing out of fantasy. So I don't think the original Oblivion is too green or too bright, especially not if you want to say it's unrealistic with how green and bright it is. There are green and bright places. I'm sitting in a green and bright place. And yes, sometimes that is dependent on the time of year. You know, this is early spring. Come winter, this is going to be a cold, dead land. I'm in Missouri, the middle of the Midwest in the United States of America. And Missouri gets really good variety in the seasons here. Sometimes really good variety in a single day of the seasons here. I love Missouri, it's home. Missouri really is home to me. But, so this notion, too many fantasies are too bright, too green, too beautiful. It's like, I mean, that's not unrealistic. The world is bright, the world is beautiful. And so this modern push for darker, grittier worlds, I think we're losing a lot of the beauty of fantasy worlds. And I think that's something that fantasy should encapsulate. It's the fantastical, the thing that inspires us and makes us wonder. It should be beautiful. Now, I'm not talking about, yay, happy, cheery, go-lucky, no struggles, no sufferings, or anything like that. You know, obviously, drama needs darkness, in a sense. But I think there's a misconception about storytelling in general. You do not garnish more emotion by having a maximally dark world. It's not the grittier, the more emotion or the more nuance you can get out of it. Actually, great artistry is playing on the contrasts. You know, there's an opera/musical, Les Mis. A very dark, very gritty world. And a lot of Les Mis is really kind of trying to get maximum emotion about everything. It translates as the miserables. All the characters are constantly suffering. None of the characters have good, happy lives. They're all going through stuff. And so Les Mis is trying to express all the different forms of suffering in this world. But the story I actually like most in Les Mis is actually the story of Cosette and Marius, the two lovers. And why is that my preferred story? Is it because I'm just so romantic? No, I think because that's the one story thread that actually gets some positivity in it. Having a big, bright, beautiful world is not just shallow, cheery stuff. It's actually the opportunity for some really great contrast between the dark and gritty. I think this is something regarding Lord of the Rings, and a specific line in that, when Frodo and Sam are at the point of just wanting to give up, and it's like wondering if it's really worth going on with this quest. And there's a famous line by Sam, that they're still good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. That's something that these dark, gritty worlds, they do not capture the sense. That there's good worth fighting for, that there's beauty worth fighting for. If the world is just all dark, all depressed, all grim, all gritty, why are we trying so hard to save it? Right? Why are we going through so much suffering trying to save this world that's just suffering anyway? And I think that's something that Oblivion actually does capture really well, because it is this lush paradise, this green, vibrant world that's being sucked into hell. I mean, think about that. I mean, that's like the pinnacle of contrast. Lush, paradise-like world being sucked into hell. So when you're trying to stop the Oblivion crisis, you're not just trying to save a dark, gritty world from a darker, grittier world. You're trying to save a beautiful, wonderful world from a dark, gritty world. There's more stakes in that. There's a line in Skyrim towards the end of it, which it's been a while since I've played the main quest in Skyrim, so I might butcher this a little bit, but Parthenax asks the player character if he's considered that maybe it's time for this world to end. You know, you're trying to stop the World Eater from ending the world. And so Parthenax asks the main character, maybe, have you considered that it's time for the world to end? Maybe it's time this world dies and a new world can be born in its stead. And the player character has an option to say a line that goes something along the lines of, well, maybe I like this world. You know, maybe I think this world is worth saving. I mean, yes, I know that there is a lot of drama, there's a lot of controversy, a lot of darkness that's going on in the world with the Civil War and the Thalmor and all that stuff. But, you know, even in all that, even all the darkness, all the grim, I still think that this world is worth saving. And therefore, I'm going to do whatever it takes to save this world. I'm going to go through all this suffering to save a world because I still think that the world is beautiful and worth saving. But how do you actually really capture that when all you're seeing is just grimness, right? How are you selling the audience on this notion that the world is worth saving? I think that having a bright, beautiful world really encapsulates that concept of this being something that is worth saving. This is worth suffering in order to save. If this is the first video of mine that you're watching, then a little thing about me is I'm a devout Christian. I have a passion for theology and apologetics. And there are some themes in Christianity that I think are pertinent here. So one theme would be the return to Eden narrative. The Bible starts out with mankind in paradise, And then by rebelling against God, that paradise falls into disarray. And much of the rest of the story is man trying to reclaim that paradise. And a lot of the symbolism in the story is even God trying to bring us back to that paradise. So there's a whole bunch of imagery in the temple about the return to paradise. Humanity was driven out of the Garden of Eden, which, by the way, Eden is literally the Hebrew word for paradise. So humanity was driven out of the Garden of Eden to the east. So when you enter the temple, you come from the east. A lot of the imagery of the temple is resembling the Garden of Eden. So it's undoing the fall. It's returning to paradise, going into the temple to worship God. So a lot of people try making grittier, darker worlds, but the contrast between the dark and light, I think, is much more opportunity for storytelling. So again, Oblivion is a great example. Paradise being sucked into hell. You've got to save paradise from being sucked into hell. Much stronger than, well, just one gritty world being sucked into a more gritty world. There's more value in saving Cyrodiil when it's a lush, bright, beautiful, perfect world versus when it's just a gritty, no man's land type world. And so I think a lot of these gritty, dark worlds are actually really doing a disservice in their attempt to make things more dark or more gritty. And I would like to see more of this idea of exploring brighter, more beautiful worlds. Editor Kenton here, with some lush new scenery. The older I get, the more I appreciate a specific feature of how J.R.R. Tolkien helped us fall in love with his world. The Lord of the Rings gets criticized for its slow start. I mean, the book spends like 5 chapters just in the Shire, and the movie probably like at least an hour in the Shire. But it's exactly that time that we spend in the Shire that helps us fall in love with the world. And I think this is something that Peter Jackson's movie especially did well. It's small things like seeing kids run in fields, seeing the hobbits genuinely happy to set up for a party, seeing feasting and drinking and telling stories with one another. It's all these things with the hobbits just living their life peacefully in a lush green world. That makes us care all the more when we see the Shire threatened. When Frodo looks into Galadriel's mirror and sees the Shire scorched. Or when Merry and Pippin fail to convince Trebio to join the war. Pippin is like, this world is too big for us. Let's just go back home. We've got the Shire. And Merry points out that if they lose the war, they will not have the Shire anymore. The fact that we've seen how peaceful and beautiful the Shire is what makes us care not to lose it. This is something I didn't care about when I was a kid watching Lord of the Rings, but as I'm older, the more I appreciate the nuance of it. But I think there's even a lot of opportunity in playing with this contrast between the bright, beautiful world versus the dark, gritty world. Having a more gritty world does not automatically mean a more exciting world. There's so much opportunity you can do with a bright world. Lush biomes is a lot of life competing for resources. So those life forms evolve a series of defenses and offenses in order to survive an environment. So having a lush, bright world, there's opportunity for a whole bunch of biodiversity that is all competing against one another, and opportunity for drama and danger in that. And transversely, a dark, grim, dead world should actually have a harder time developing some of these things. So like dragons, a big giant flying lizard that breathes fire, that would require a big metabolism in order to sustain its life. Big metabolism means it needs to eat a lot of food. So if you got a dark, dead, gritty world and dragons flying around everywhere, what are the dragons eating so that they can stay alive? What other big giant beasts do you have in your world that just would not realistically be able to sustain its life with that much body mass and that much power trying to eat? There's nothing for it to eat. So how do these big monstrous creatures survive a dark, gritty world so that they might terrorize the world? They wouldn't. But in a lush green world where there is plenty of food, there's plenty of resources, and all these life forms are competing for the resources, that's where you've got opportunity for big giant monsters to really evolve. In which sense, humans or whatever playable races you have, they're competing with this diverse biosphere. Are we rising to the top of the food chain? Are we falling down from the food chain? How does it play out? So what if your fantasy world, humanity is just the absolute pinnacle of the food chain, and there is no competitor? It does not have dragons. It does not have monstrous beasts. You've got a world where there isn't even a whole bunch of dangerous deserts or anything like that. The entire world is just lush, bright. Now, never mind how scientifically it would work, but the entire world somehow is just big, lush, bright, prosperous. What would that look like for a humanity that is just innately selfish and propagandistic. How does humanity look like when humanity is so on top of the world, so much higher in the food chain than everyone else, that the character's competition in the food chain is not against monstrous beasts, but against humans? How does it look when it's not a matter of competition for resources, but competition for greed? When you've got well more than enough to feed the entire world, but people are going hungry because selfish people hoard it, because people in power hoard it. How does that play out in a world? And that is political drama within a would-be paradise. But also there's opportunity for other things. For example, poison. Poison is a biological deterrent so that things won't eat it. There's opportunity with poison, and specifically with beauty. What if you got a really beautiful flower or a really appetizing fruit that is actually highly poisonous? Delectable tea or a deadly poison. You can use that to create a sense of enticement, and maybe even not something that's just overtly a poison. This is a delectable looking thing, but you eat it and it just immediately kills you. What about it becomes an addictive substance? It doesn't kill you right away. It's kind of a drug. You get addicted to it, and slowly over time it starts diminishing your health. It eventually kills you. But enticement needs to be enticing. Why is everybody addicted to this thing unless it's something to desire? But also, what about the opportunity for emotional development in this bright, big, perfect world? Now, I'm working on a book myself, and it's not going to be out anytime soon by a long shot. But there's a particular theme, and there's this scene where this character named Belethia, who is an elf, goes through the most tragic experience of her life. And while she's recovering from this traumatic experience, literally physically and emotionally healing, she is kept inside a dark building for several days, until finally she goes outside for the first time in a few days. It says this: Belethia walked outside. The sun was blindingly bright, and yet the brightness was beautiful in some strange way. She squinted and blocked out the direct light of the sun with her hand until slowly the saturation of day began to turn to tangible color. The sky was clear blue, with few clouds gracefully adorning the canvas. The fields were radiant green, hardly darker than her own eyes. The open fields were peaceful. Their hills formed a barrier to the dark forest. The buildings, like outposts, formed a fortress around her. A cool breeze carried the scent of snow from the mountains and mixed with the moist air from the sea. She stood still in dreadful wonder. It is observed by the wise among the elves that humans living in darkness hide from the light, never heeding the pragmatics of the light. They choose the misery of darkness. Now I understand. The light is beautiful, but it is also painful. I love this concept of the elves not understanding the humans and why they shun the light. And I love this moment where Belethia has a very human moment, and she comes to sympathize, she comes to understand, she gets it. The weight of the scene is in how beautiful the world is. The beauty of the world is standing in stark contrast to the trauma that Belethia is dealing with. And in a way, she's scared. This is a very human moment for her, and she doesn't know what to make of it. But it's exactly this contrast with the bright, beautiful world with the dark, grim world. The description of the bright green grass contrasted with the dark forest. How the hills and the buildings form a barrier to that dark forest. That contrast shows that Belethia fears the forest. Belethia is wrestling with beauty and fear, darkness and light. She's having a very human experience, and as an elf, she doesn't get it. She doesn't understand it. That's why it describes the fields as forming a fortress around her, protecting her from the forest. That's why the fields are bright green and the forest is dark. This scene is Belethia in her darkest, standing in the world that appears to be its brightest. And it's a difficult contrast for her to process. The light is beautiful, but it is also painful. It's not just straight pragmatism like the elves think. There's pain in beauty. In the Bible, Jesus is described as the light of the world, and John opens his gospel with talking about Jesus coming into the world. He says, "There is a true light, which coming into the world enlightens all men. He was in the world, and the world did not know him. He came to his own, and those who were his own did not receive him." And a couple of chapters later in John, it talks about the light has come into the world. It says the people hated the light because they loved the darkness. And that is something that Belethia is coming to understand. When you're in darkness, the light is terrorizing. I love a specific scene in Avengers Endgame where after Hawkeye has lost everything, he kind of really descended into an extremely dark place. Then after many years of being in that dark place, Natasha comes to him and says, "Hey, we found something." I love Hawkeye's line, "Don't give me hope." He's in such a dark place that even the idea that the world can get better is haunting to him. He is too afraid to hope for a better outcome. The light is beautiful, but it is also painful. And I can't help but wonder if that is actually why society has started preferring these grimmer, darker worlds. I don't think it is controversial to say that we are the most depressed generation in the entire history of the world. There's almost a stigma against happy stories, against bright, beautiful, lush green worlds. And I think that's probably because we are in that state that Belethia is experiencing, that the elves don't understand. There's pragmatics to the light, and the light is beautiful, but it's also painful for us to wrestle with. Maybe, in a sense, these grim, dark worlds is a form of escapism. Different from the big, bright, beautiful worlds, that's an escapism to escape to a better world, but these grim, dark worlds, they're an escapism to where we can feel better about our life. The grittiness makes them not feel like a fairy tale, like something to just tell ourselves to make us feel better. But here's the thing, J.R.R. Tolkien, when he wrote Lord of the Rings, the world wasn't big, bright, and beautiful for him. People who criticize Tolkien for being too black and white, he fought in war. I don't remember if he fought in World War I or World War II, but he fought in one of the biggest, most gritty battles in human history. So do we think that Tolkien doesn't understand what the world is really like? That he doesn't understand the gritty darkness of the world? I think when Tolkien writes the line from Sam, "This is worse than Mordor because it's bringing it home," I think he understood very well what that meant. I think when Tolkien wrote the line that there's still good in the world and it's worth fighting for, I think he was wrestling with some deep things within himself. Big, bright, beautiful worlds are not shallow, and they're not unrealistic. The world is beautiful, and there is some positivity in the world. In the Bible, the book of Isaiah, there's a passage, "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light." That is terrifying, but that is also beautiful. But see how a lush green world really gives a whole lot more opportunity for diversity, a whole lot more opportunity for nuance. And it's really the dead cold world that's actually really starved for nuance and intrigue. So what kind of themes can you explore with a bright world falling into disarray? What kind of contrast can you have between a bright, beautiful, lush world versus a dark, gritty world? I think this has more to explore in a fantastical element than just dark, gritty. And so that's what I like to see more of in fantasy as a whole. I want to see fantastical worlds that are beautiful, that are lush, that are vibrant, that are so inspiring for what could be, but yet a danger of what could be lost also. I'm not talking about a perfect world where there's no suffering or anything. No, I'm actually the opposite. I'm talking about a world that could be perfect, but which has a threat which can take away that paradise. So yes, I would like fantasy to embrace this more lush green worlds versus this dark gritty worlds. But feel free to comment what your thoughts are on this. But anyway guys, thanks for watching.